Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping straight into a really fascinating exploration of Yesenia Fernández Waldron's upcoming book, A Wounded Mother.
Yeah, looking forward to this.
Our mission today is really to pull out the key insights about this powerful archetype. Where does it come from? How does it actually show up in life?
Right.
And maybe most importantly, its potential for healing. We want to look especially through the lens of women of color, which is central to the book.
Absolutely. And our main source is the book draft itself. A Wounded Mother book, Draft 001, coming in 2025. It's a really rich text.
And the author, Yesenia Fernández Waldron, tell us a bit about her.
Well, she's an artist, a mother, a woman of color, Dominican roots, based right here in NYC.
Okay.
And her own personal background, experiences with religious trauma, childhood trauma, that really informs her work. She's digging into reclaiming feminine power, specifically for WOC, through this archetype.
That context feels really important. And the book's coming from Lost Ravens Studios.
That's right. Scheduled for Mother's Day, May 11th, 2025. Ebook and paperback.
Got it. So her background as an artist, plus her mental health counseling work, that really grounds it.
It really does.
So to kind of set the stage, maybe think about Demeter and Persephone, that ancient myth.
Yeah. Classic example.
That raw grief, right? When Demeter loses Persephone, it's just such a visceral image of maternal sorrow, but also fierce power.
Absolutely. You can almost feel it, that primal pain and strength mixed together.
It's like it captures that core tension, maybe.
Exactly. That myth is like a concentrated dose of what the wounded mother archetype is about. Immense love, nurturing power, but right alongside deep pain and vulnerability. And, to really understand the framework, we should probably touch on Carl Jung.
Right. Archetypes.
Yeah, his idea of archetypes in the collective unconscious.
Yeah.
These universal patterns we all share. And the mother figure, well, she's one of the big ones, hugely complex.
Okay, so let's dive right in then, this wounded mother archetype. What's the core idea we need to grasp?
Well, okay. At its heart, think of the wounded mother archetype as this figure deep in our collective psyche. Right?
Okay.
Whose pain and vulnerability are, well, just as profound as her power to nurture. Jung talked about the mother archetype having this inherent ambivalence.
Not just sweetness and light?
Exactly, not just nurturing. There's what he called the negative side, the hidden, the dark, maybe even devouring or terrifying aspects.
Wow, okay.
And that's where the idea of a mother complex can come in, often linked to, well, injury or illness, difficult experiences with the maternal figure in our lives.
So when Yesenia talks about a wounded mother, this isn't necessarily just someone who's given birth.
Precisely. That's key. She defines it much more broadly. It could be anyone, really, whose experience of motherhood, and that could be literal, symbolic, nurturing, or even spiritual self-care, is shaped by wounds that haven't been resolved.
Yeah.
And these wounds make it harder to nurture, to connect, both with others and, importantly, with oneself.
So it transcends biology, gender?
Totally. It's presented as a universal human thing.
And where do these wounds typically originate, psychologically speaking?
Often the roots are in those early experiences. Things like emotional neglect, that feeling of being unseen, unheard, or, more overt stuff like abuse, constant criticism that just wears you down, or the deep pain of abandonment.
Right.
And these early wounds, they can create real challenges later on. Difficulty with self-care, managing emotions, setting healthy boundaries.
Yeah, I could see that.
Building secure relationships.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's this really harsh inner critic, like an internalized negative maternal voice.
Wow, that sounds tough. The book also mentions a meta-spiritual level. Intriguing.
Yes. So on this deeper level, the wounded mother archetype also speaks to how we relate to our own inner self, like being a mother to the self.
Okay, what does that mean exactly?
It's about consciously reparenting your inner child. That vulnerable part that still carries those old hurts,
Right.
It means offering yourself the kindness, the compassion, the care that maybe you didn't get back then. Turning that compassion inward.
Now, the connection to the wounded healer archetype, that always feels so potent. How does the wounded mother fit with that?
Yeah, it's a powerful link. The wounded mother archetype is really like the feminine expression of the wounded healer.
Okay.
The idea is that our own wounds, our brokenness, instead of being something to hide, they can actually become pathways. Pathways to understanding others, to helping others heal.
So healing isn't about perfection.
Not at all. Often, real healing comes from embracing our imperfections, our vulnerabilities. That's where the connection happens.
It sounds like encountering this archetype, it might not always be, well, comfortable.
Definitely not always comfortable. Often it gets triggered by a big life event, a real shakeup.
Like what?
Could be a major loss, grief, or the huge shift of becoming a mother yourself. Or a trauma that just shatters your world. Even a spiritual awakening can do it.
Right.
These crises, they can kind of strip away our defenses, force us to face those deep wounds. It's often called a descent.
A descent. That sounds challenging.
It can be incredibly challenging.
Yeah.
But the potential within that descent is huge.
Yeah.
Potential for rebirth, for finding a stronger inner authority, a deeper knowing.
No, the book really emphasizes looking at the cultural, social, ancestral pieces too, especially for women of color. Why is that so critical here?
It's absolutely crucial. Yesenia's work deliberately looks at how culture, social injustice, ancestral history, how all that shapes this archetype specifically for women of color.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all archetype.
Not even close. Their experiences are often woven together with race, ethnicity, systemic oppression in unique ways. It gives a much richer, more nuanced picture than just looking at it individually.
So the book isn't just about mapping the pain, it's also pointing towards healing, empowerment.
Exactly, that's the core aim. A wounded mother wants to illuminate the transformative potential within the archetype.
How does it do that?
By blending insights from spirituality, psychology, cultural studies, it offers pathways, tools for healing and empowerment. It's really about guiding readers on their own journey, helping them navigate the wounded feminine towards growth.
And it sounds vital that it centers voices that maybe haven't always been heard in these kinds of discussions.
Absolutely vital. By focusing on women of color, the book amplifies marginalized voices in archetypal psychology and spirituality.
Right.
It shows how the wounded feminine shows up differently in diverse cultures, and it really highlights the incredible strength and resilience often found in community healing traditions.
The author draws on a really interesting mix of thinkers, too, right?
She really does. It's very interdisciplinary. You got Jung, of course, but also spiritual teachers like Henri Nouwen, and really key feminist, womanist, and mujerista theologians and cultural critics. People like Lisa Marchiano, Edda Maria Isasi Diaz, Gloria Anzaldúa, Christina Cleveland.
Wow, quite a range.
Yeah, it allows for a really holistic view.
Okay, before we dive deeper, maybe we could quickly define some key terms, just so we're all on the same page.
Good idea.
Yeah.
Definitely. So, internalized negative mother, that's that harsh inner critic we talked about.
Right, undermining.
Totally. Then the mother archetype itself. Remember its duality, nurturing, but also the shadow side.
Got it.
The mother complex, those patterns of feeling and behavior linked to the archetype. The book also critiques the limiting mom stereotype in society.
Okay.
Delves into the deep primal relationship and fear around early dependency. Talks about projection, putting parts of the archetype onto others.
Makes sense.
The shadow of motherhood covers those tough, repressed feelings. The terrible mother archetype is that overwhelming, possessive side.
Right.
Traumatic conditions can arise from disruptions with these energies. Two-faced maternity, again, highlights the ambivalence.
Okay.
The unmothered experience, lacking that consistent emotional nurture. And finally, the witch Bruja archetype, explored not just negatively, but also for its potential wisdom and instinctual power.
Okay, that's super helpful context. Now let's really dig into this idea of the feminine wound. Sounds central.
It really is.
Yeah.
Yesenia starts very personally, sharing her own reflections. The physical, emotional toll of motherhood.
Like childbirth, postpartum?
Yeah, childbirth, menstruation, postpartum depression. And that feeling, which I think many caregivers relate to, of kind of losing oneself in the demands.
That visceral starting point feels important.
It provides a crucial foundation, yeah.
She also uses this really striking image, the handless maiden, talking about a severing of feminine instincts. What's that about?
That image, it's so potent. It speaks to feeling like your agency, your ability to act has been taken. Often linked to patriarchal culture, the symbolic father wounding.
Making you feel powerless.
Exactly. From your own inner wisdom, your strength, past traumas casting a shadow, especially when you become a mother yourself.
And this leads into the mother wound concept,
Yeah.
which is distinct from the broader archetype, right?
Yes. Good distinction. The mother wound is specifically about the emotional, psychological pain from a mother figure not being able to provide consistent emotional nurturing.
Right.
And really key here. It's not about blaming individual mothers. It's about seeing and maybe starting to heal the generational patterns passed down the female line.
So how does this mother wound typically show up? What are the core aspects?
Well, there are a few key patterns. Emotional abandonment or neglect. That deep sense of not being truly seen or validated.
Okay.
Conditional love, feeling like love depends on performance, on meeting expectations, silencing or shame around expressing your true feelings, developing insecurity of people-pleasing tendencies to try and earn that love.
Right, trying to get approval.
Exactly. And often just a basic lack of modeling for self-love, not seeing self-compassion demonstrated, making it harder to develop later.
And again, the book stresses this gets amplified, complicated for marginalized folks.
Absolutely. For WOC, queer individuals, others, the mother wound often gets tangled up with systemic oppression.
Like colonialism, racism.
Yeah, colonialism, patriarchy, racism, poverty, intergenerational trauma. These huge forces can actually distort mothering itself. Survival needs might unfortunately overshadow consistent emotional nurture.
Yesenia shares her own story here, growing up Latina in the Bronx.
Yeah.
What does that illuminate?
Her story is incredibly powerful. She talks about how systemic oppression intensified the mother wound in her life. Sometimes society, the state, almost steps in to parent before parents even can due to those pressures.
Wow.
And she talks about that added pain of being unseen in a society with existing stereotypes. She references Christina Cleveland's idea of a world shaped by a white male god, which inherently devalues others.
She also brings up the strong Black woman archetype. How does that connect?
That's such an insightful point. On the surface, it looks like strength, like armor, which it can be.
Right.
But it can also be a cage, silencing vulnerability, silencing the need for support, all in the name of resilience. It creates this really tough dynamic. Praise for outward strength, but the inner need for care gets ignored or even punished.
That's complex. And the book brings in Mujerista theology here, too. What does that add?
Yes, and it's a vital perspective. Mujerista theology reminds us that for women facing intense systemic pressures, survival itself is sacred. It's resistance.
Okay.
And it highlights the incredibly resourceful ways marginalized communities create their own ways of caring, even with scarce resources.
So if someone's listening and recognizing parts of this mother wound, what steps towards healing does the book suggest?
It outlines several key paths. Reparenting the inner child, consciously giving yourself that care and validation now, grieving what was missing, letting yourself feel the loss of the nurture you needed without judgment, breaking the cycle, making conscious choices to relate differently now to yourself and others, and spiritual reclamation, finding a source of unconditional love, maybe the divine feminine, maybe something else that resonates.
Yesenia's own journey sounds like a core part of the book, confronting the wound herself.
She's very honest about it, facing the pain, revisiting memories, feeling it all. She describes motherhood, literal and symbolic, as this crucible.
A crucible.
Yeah, really challenging her, forcing her to face her shadow, but ultimately leading to a kind of rebirth, more authentic, more integrated.
What was key for her in that?
Gathering the fragments of herself, learning to accept her own needs without shame, and finding crucial support in relationships, in community. That was vital.
And it sounds like through these experiences, the definition of care itself might expand.
Definitely. In communities focused on survival, nurture might look different. Not always soft words.
Right.
It might be showing up, providing food, shelter, holding space for righteous anger, creating sanctuaries within oppressive systems. Very practical, essential forms of care.
So this whole section, it's not about erasing the past wound.
Not at all. It's about turning towards the pain, piecing life back together with the tools you have, daring to see yourself as whole and worthy despite the wounds, and finding connection, even strength, in those broken places.
Okay, let's shift now to the great mother archetype. How is this different from the wounded mother or the mother wound?
Okay, the great mother. This much bigger, broader, deeper. Think of it as a fundamental energy, the life-giving matrix of everything.
Universal.
Universal, within all of us, regardless of gender or personal history, like a blueprint in our shared human psyche. Alongside the hero, it's foundational.
So not specifically about our personal mothers.
Exactly. It's this eternal, pervasive form shaping our inner world. Comes from ancient, instinctual wisdom. Encountering her can bring up powerful feelings, awe, reverence, sometimes primal fear.
How might we experience her? Yesenia describes her as an atmosphere.
Yeah, less a specific person, more an encompassing presence or force, containing everything: life, death, nurture, danger, hidden, visible, the whole spectrum.
And she shows up in lots of different forms, symbols.
Incredibly varied. Could be personal figures, mothers, grandmothers, goddesses like Kali, Isis, Sophia, the Black Madonna.
Right.
Sacred places, the sea, forests, holy wells, symbols like the moon, the rose, the womb, a vessel. Okay. And importantly, for LGBTQI+ folks, she might be felt in chosen family, queer elders, Sacred spaces where they feel fully welcomed.
The book stresses her ambivalence too, the loving and the terrible mother.
Crucial point. She embodies that fundamental paradox of creation and destruction.
Both sides.
Both sides. The loving side is nourishment, protection, radical welcome, growth, comfort, support. But the shadow side, that can be suffocating control, possessiveness, even terrifying aspects.
When might that shadow show up?
Especially in experiences of abandonment, deep shame, or maybe religious trauma from rigid doctrines. For many queer folks, that terrible mother shadow might get projected onto rejecting families.
What's the psychological significance of connecting with this archetype?
She's at the root of our psychic development, shapes our earliest bonds, influences how we relate throughout life.
So it affects our complexes.
Deeply, especially for queer and trans individuals navigating those complex mother complexes, that longing for nurture mixed with fear of control or rejection. It's often a big part of their journey.
And healing the mother wound in that context.
Often involves actively reclaiming that inner archetypal mother in a life-giving way, creating new rituals, new language that affirms their authentic identity and experience.
So ultimately, what's the big deal about encountering the great mother within?
According to the book, it leads to finding the jewel of selfhood, that authentic core within each of us. She's the matrix of our consciousness.
Okay.
Her essence is fertile, transformative, whole, offering both home and horizon, especially for those outside of the usual norms.
Now, the book shifts perspective again, viewing the wounded mother as a life system. That sounds like a major broadening.
It really is. Here, the wounded mother isn't just an individual thing anymore. It's seen as an interconnected force affecting overall well-being.
Like an ecosystem.
Exactly like that. A disruption in one part affects the whole. So healing means shifting focus beyond just personal trauma.
To what?
To understanding cycles, renewal, regeneration, our fundamental interconnectedness with everything.
He uses metaphors from nature, right? Seasons, life cycles.
Yes, powerful metaphors. Healing the wounded feminine mirrors these natural rhythms, destruction of the old, birth of the new. It's cyclical.
And requires inner work.
Definitely. Engaging with the shadow, consistent self-nurturing, and crucially, seeking community support. It's not a solo journey.
There's a theopoetic story in the book illustrating this.
Yes, a beautiful one. About the mother holding the world, starting to break from feeling unseen, undervalued. It really emphasizes that interconnectedness. Her grief ripples out. But even in brokenness, her grief becomes like compost, fueling new life.
And a realization about her worth.
Yes, that her value is in her presence, not just her output, her productivity.
So the key takeaway is the healing impact is wider than just the individual.
Precisely. When the wounded mother chooses self-care, prioritizes her own well-being, it allows the whole system around her relationships, community, environment to breathe again.
Fostering shared healing.
A shared harvest of healing, a return to rhythm. It powerfully argues that nurturing the world starts with self-mothering.
The next section digs into the neglected feminine within. What's being neglected here?
This is about a felt absence, personal and global. Those essential feminine aspects, intuition, receptivity, emotional wisdom that have been ignored, suppressed, misunderstood.
Buried by
patriarchal structures, theology, societal fears. For many, it creates this deep, often unconscious longing for something vital that's been lost or hidden.
The book mentions figures like Sophia, Lilith, Anima, the Black Madonna. How have they been affected?
Yeah. Powerful figures like Sophia, divine wisdom, or Lilith, untamed feminine, often got erased or twisted into negative caricatures in dominant narratives.
Sophia veiled, Lilith demonized.
Exactly. Sophia often sidelined in Western traditions. Lilith, instead of being seen as independent, became a malevolent force. Anima, feminine in the male psyche, the Black Madonna, earthy divine feminine, they've also faced neglect or misinterpretation.
What are the consequences of this neglect?
Well, gendered hierarchies often label inner feminine qualities as weakness or temptation.
Leading to projection.
Yes. Men might project their anima onto women. Women might over-identify with masculine ideals to gain acceptance. This creates estrangement from our own depths, from the mother of all, that core feminine principle.
So it's a broad cultural systemic imbalance.
Absolutely. The divine feminine largely submerged by patriarchal systems. But the book offers hope. This neglected feminine isn't gone.
It's dreaming.
Dreaming, stirring. In our dreams, rituals, revolutions, the voices of the outcast, it's rising, seeking rebalance, reminding us the holy is within.
There's a theopoetic expression capturing this.
Yes, beautifully describes that quiet, intuitive presence within. embodied intuition, dream, feeling, becoming.
How it gets silenced.
Silence for survival, often, but it waits. Waits for rediscovery through surrender, self-compassion, returning to an honored inner rhythm.
The next chapter moves to the active process, nurturing the unnurtured. What does this involve?
This is about consciously tending to those parts in ourselves, others, the divine that have been wounded, silenced, forgotten.
A path of healing.
Of healing and reintegration. Through listening without judgment, reclaiming what's been cast aside, allowing love back into those abandoned spaces.
It talks about feeling disconnected from instincts, especially when caregiving.
Yes, easily done when constantly giving out. Nurturing the unnurtured here starts with reattuning to inner promptings, trusting our bodies, emotions, recognizing the unconscious mind's regenerative power.
And the wounded healer archetype comes back here.
Centrally, understanding our own brokenness helps us empathize and heal others. Embracing our wounds allows us to walk alongside others in their pain, offer genuine support from shared experience.
Looking into the shadow is emphasized again, too.
Yes, like in folktales where healing happens in dark places. Looking at our rejected parts can be incredibly transformative.
Not just personal work.
No, it connects to collective liberation work.
Yeah.
Reclaiming our full, complex humanity, light and dark.
Glory Anzaldua's wisdom is brought in.
Yes, her idea of being culturally crucified, yet still nurturing from ancestral knowing. It highlights that resilience, that capacity to care, even amidst hardship.
So the core message of this chapter.
Nurturing the unnurtured is a radical act. Reclamation. Learning to love what's been cast out in ourselves and others. Trusting intuition, the irrational. Offering presence where there was absence. A lifelong journey of integration, liberating ourselves from judgment and fear.
Then we move to love as liberation. Sounds powerful.
It is. Presented not as passive emotion, but deeply embodied, fiercely committed, tied to freedom, personal and collective, a force that moves us, sustains us towards wholeness and justice.
Love as the condition for liberation.
Exactly. The book suggests love creates the space for dialogue, and dialogue is fundamental for humanization. Without that foundation, care, respect, empathy, real liberation can't take root.
So love here is courageous.
It's an act of courage, a conscious choice for openness, commitment to dignity, our own and others.
And there's a link to the divine feminine again.
Yes, connecting with Sophia, the Black woman god, that sacred feminine principle, as a source of empowering love that seeks freedom for all, fostering inherent worthiness, empowering us to extend freedom to others.
Liberation here seems broader than just external freedom.
Absolutely. It includes inner work, transforming relationships with self, with others, unlearning hiding, bringing our full authentic selves, growing in awareness, conscientization, moving beyond distorted patriarchal ideas of love, offering hospitality, acceptance.
It acknowledges love isn't always simple, right? Paradoxical.
Yes, complex. Can hold darkness and light, wounding and healing. The path isn't linear. The wounded healer idea returns to transforming pain into nurture, liberation for others. Even struggle becomes love in action.
So the ultimate message about love and liberation.
Love is the journey, the struggle, the process, the destination, the driving force behind liberation, and what we find when we arrive at greater freedom. It asks everything and offers everything we truly need.
The next section focuses on healing from vulnerability. How is vulnerability reframed here?
It's not about eliminating vulnerability. It's about consciously sitting with the weak, wounded, unsure parts, recognizing that as sacred ground for transformation.
Starting with truth-telling.
Telling our truth, even when it's scary, is the essential first step.
And facing pain directly.
Yes, intentionally being present with discomfort, painful memories, raw edges, not running. This allows reclaiming lost parts. Even fear becomes a teacher, guiding us to self-understanding, resilience.
And wounds are reframed again, not just deficits.
Right, not things to hide. Potential sources of strength, wisdom, authentic connection for ourselves and for building bridges of empathy with others. Shared vulnerability becomes a catalyst.
Relationships seem crucial here.
Healing rarely happens alone. Compassionate presence from others, support without fixing is essential. And the book highlights the power of unconditional divine love embracing all parts, even the shamed ones.
So the potential outcome of healing from vulnerability.
Profound openness to transformation. Wounds become openings for light, wisdom, connection. Liberation comes not from pretending invulnerability, but from radical self-love that sees broken pieces as holy aspects of our shared humanity.
The following chapter, protecting the unprotected. What motivates this?
Often comes directly from our own healing journey. Integrating our wounds, growing self-compassion, leads to a visceral recognition of pain and injustice around us.
An urge to act.
A powerful urge to stand in solidarity with the ignored, silenced, harmed.
It goes beyond just empathy.
It's raw compassion from knowing vulnerability firsthand, fosters kinship with others suffering, a desire to offer protection.
And it's presented as a shared task.
Absolutely. Not a solo act. Requires joining in solidarity, working collectively for everyone's liberation and well-being, creating safe, welcoming spaces where vulnerability is honored, held.
Hospitality as resistance.
In a world punishing vulnerability, yes. Creating safe havens is resistance.
It also means challenging systems.
Yes. Confronting the structures that create vulnerability, walking alongside people reclaiming power, listening deeply, challenging oppressive forces.
What's the ultimate impact of choosing this?
Reclaiming our shared humanity. Remembering healing is political and spiritual, affirming the worth, dignity, and right to liberation for all. Our well-being is tied to the communities.
The book then moves towards a journey toward wholeness. Feels like a culmination. What's this journey like?
Describes individuation becoming more authentic as ongoing, often unpredictable, integrating fragmented parts into a truer whole.
Not about perfection.
Not at all. Lifelong process of peeling back masks, wounds, revealing who we always were underneath.
Healing is central to this.
Absolutely. Starts with recognizing pain from fragmentation, then integrating light shadow, masculine, feminine, conscious, unconscious.
The wholeness comes from
Holding all parts with compassion, allowing wounds to become generative, growth, wisdom.
it emphasizes the power within wounds again.
Yes. To be human is to be wounded. Transformation happens through wounds. Darkness isn't just absence, it's fertile ground.
How do we approach that?
Meeting our shadow with softness, compassion, allowing the cyclical descent experiences like motherhood invite. It's essential.
So it's cyclical, not linear.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Ongoing cycles, descent into pain, exploration, returning with new wisdom, resilience, deeper self-understanding.
Purpose can emerge from suffering.
Often does. Allows us to offer unique hospitality, support through shared pain in our service, our ministry.
What supports this journey practically?
Cultivating emotional literacy, recognizing, naming, understanding emotions, and actively nurturing our spiritual fire through connection practices.
The ultimate insight on this journey.
The mother archetype reminds us we can hold grief and joy simultaneously. Self-healing, the journey to wholeness, it's a lifelong return to a more integrated, alive, authentic self.
The final section focuses specifically on women of color, starting with ancestral wounds and feminine recovery, a critical dimension.
Absolutely critical. For WOC, wholeness means confronting deep, often intergenerational ancestral wounds, from colonization, displacement, enslavement, ongoing oppression.
These aren't just history.
No, they're embodied, still shaping lived experience, spiritual landscapes today. So healing is deeply collective, echoing foremothers' pain, carrying historical injustice, fighting the colonizer within.
Reclaiming agency is key.
Healing starts there, trusting one's lived experience as wisdom, reclaiming agency, identity denied or distorted, allowing the full spectrum of feeling. The sacred feminine often calls one back to the authentic self.
And community is vital.
Absolutely. Finding strength, validation, healing, and supportive communities of other women who get it on a personal level. Motherhood might be reframed as presence over perfection, rooted in love.
The ultimate aim for WSC in this.
Transforming ancestral and personal pain into sacred ground, a source of wisdom, resilience, power. Healing is lifelong, cyclical, demands truth, community, reflection, radical self-love. Emphasis on collective remembering, healing, rising.
Then decolonizing the feminine from a WOC perspective, what does this involve?
It's long, layered, necessary. Understanding, confronting, dismantling how colonialism and patriarchy shaped and still shape WOC identities.
Recognizing imposed ideals.
Yes. The imposition of white Western femininity as the standard, marking other identities as other, lesser, subject to violence. The history of gagging, caging, sterilizing, brutalizing WOC bodies and spirits.
So it's about rejecting those narratives, reclaiming power.
Absolutely. Actively withdrawing consent from inherited lies, stereotypes. Confronting the internalized oppressor. Reclaiming authentic power. Redefining identity through lived experience, culture, self-determination.
Identity as fluid.
Fluid, dynamic, formed by pain and joy, resistance and resilience. Voice, memory, storytelling become sacred tools for healing, resistance, reconnecting with the wild, intuitive feminine that was suppressed.
And this is collective work too.
Fundamentally, WOC coming together, reclaiming stories, creating safe, empowering spaces where pain and power coexist, writing themselves back into history on their own terms, challenging dominant narratives, celebrating multifaceted identities.
The chapter gives specific examples for Dominican women.
Yes, concrete examples. Ingrained racial hierarchies, internalized anti-Blackness, colorism, beauty standards, identity conflicts, rigid gender roles, Marianismo impacting relationships, prioritizing male needs, family expectations over personal goals, sexual shame.
And spirituality.
Catholicism's influence, erasure of Afro-Indigenous practices like Santeria, Vodou, leading to religious guilt, spiritual double consciousness.
Other subtle colonial narratives.
Yes. Language and cultural inferiority issues, preference for Europeanized names norms, hypersexualization and policing of the feminine body, nationalism and the Haitian-Dominican divide complexities.
So the goal of decolonizing for Dominican women and other WOC.
Fully embrace ancestral knowledge, redefine restrictive beauty gender roles authentically, reconnect with pre-colonial spirituality, reject toxic norms, advocate for Afro-Caribbean-centered perspectives, paths to self-acceptance, liberation, true empowerment.
The final chapter will explore a sacred vulnerability from a WOC perspective. How is vulnerability radically reframed here?
As a conscious, intentional act, reclaiming what's been used against WOC, seeing vulnerability not as weakness, but a sacred source of power, wisdom, liberation.
Acknowledging how it was shaped by oppression.
Yes. Ancestral wounds, oppressive systems, made vulnerability seem dangerous, especially for Black girls facing the strong Black woman identity, which can silence sorrow, need.
So it's about authenticity, showing up whole.
Exactly. A radical act of being real, showing up complete, complex, messy, tender, contradictory parts acknowledged. The sacred feminine, Black feminine, Sophia, welcomes all parts. No perfection needed.
Finding wisdom and surrender, transformation through feeling.
Yes. Profound spiritual growth when we surrender to pain rather than resist. Opens capacity to feel fully, reconnect with hopes, dreams. Involves confronting the internalized oppressor telling us to be invulnerable, letting go of false selves, returning to the truest self in vulnerability.
Strength gets redefined, too.
Absolutely. Not stoicism. Courage to stand in uncertainty, ambiguity, admit fear. Trust a deeper, intuitive self, grounded by archetypes like Sophia, revealing treasures even in suffering.
The safety of community is highlighted again.
Yes. Safety in matriarchal circles of WOC, where need is sacred. Solidarity built through honest, vulnerable truth-telling. Vital.
The ultimate empowering message of sacred vulnerability.
Feeling fully, naming needs unapologetically, refusing to disown any part of our humanity. That's resistance. In a world demanding conformity, suppressing vulnerability, it honors the unapologetic Black feminine, the sacred feminine in all forms, a path to self-reclamation, collective liberation, a more just, compassionate world for everyone.
Wow. This has been just a really illuminating deep dive into a wounded mother. It's so clear Yesenia Fernández Waldron offers such a powerful, needed lens for understanding the complexities, the challenges of this archetype, but also the huge, often untapped potential for healing, for liberation, especially through the vital experiences of women of color. We've covered so much. Its presence in our psyches, individual and collective, its links to personal ancestral wounds, its transformative power for well-being, for liberation.
And we really got into the importance of acknowledging the full spectrum of the feminine, right? Including the shadows, and the unexpected strength found in embracing vulnerability, reclaiming those neglected parts of ourselves.
Definitely. So for you listening, maybe here's a final thought to just sit with for a bit. How does recognizing this wounded mother archetype, maybe in yourself, maybe in others around you, how does that start to shift your basic understanding of care, of strength, of your own unique journey toward wholeness?
That's a great question.
Yeah, maybe take some time to really consider how your own personal wounds, your experiences, how they might intersect in complex ways with those broader societal, ancestral influences.
Because it's often right there, in that intersection.
Exactly. That's where the deepest insights, the real possibilities for healing can often be found.